Myths and stories, the stories that have been shared for generations, capture patterns. They're fun to share with children, but as adults, they offer insight. The reason they have meanings is that they reveal deeper patterns within the psyche, within the cult or culture that we belong to. And as such, are useful guides into some of the territory that we all face in our lives. And I want to focus on Sleeping Beauty. So let's recap the story for a little bit. So Sleeping Beauty, a woman, a girl, the feminine, is born, and all of the relatives are invited to bless the child, to christen the child. There's a ritual of invitation, mutual honoring and blessing. And in the case of Snow White, one of the old women in the family is not given an invitation. She's not welcome at the christening. But as is always the case within the psyche, that part shows up anyway. The old woman shows up anyway, and rather than blessing the child, she offers a curse. And the curse is that Snow White will fall asleep for 100 years. Now, what does this mean? Well, one of the things that we can say about our cult, about our culture, is that vast regions of the feminine psyche are not invited to the table. They're not honored. They're not engaged with. They don't get an invitation to the christening. And so we are born, both as men and women, and the feminine side in both men and women is immediately devalued. Right? We're shifting that somewhat as we give women the right to be as masculine as men and thus to receive equal rank. But the feminine in men and in women is still dishonored, underrepresented, undervalued. Right? So our culture, from the moment we are born, takes large swaths of the feminine psyche and says, you're not welcome here. So what might those be? Intensity of feeling, embodied emotion. Right? If you go into a typical Western scene anywhere around the world, you will not find emotions being chanted, embodied. You will not find them being danced, embodied. You will not find them being cried or grieved or shouted, embodied. You will find a very narrow slot is available for appropriate expression of feelings. And it's largely, to use the voice I'm using now, that's how I learned this voice, one is able, with a certain degree of tolerance, meaning speaking about feelings at all is taboo in many circles within the Western cult. One is able, with a certain amount of tolerance, to communicate in a disembodied voice. I felt hurt and lonely when you said that. But one is not permitted to embody those feelings, to dance those feelings, to shout those feelings, to cry those feelings. And if you do, the question that the West and the Western cult uses to silence that embodiment is always the same. Is there anything wrong? To which the honest answer is obviously yes. Haven't you been paying attention? Are you blind? Are you dumb? We are surrounded by things that are wrong. But it's a targeted question. Is there anything wrong with you that you would break the cult code and embody your feelings? And the obvious question is, why not ask what's right? How did you get access to your feelings again? Because the biology and the science of biology is clear. To release one's feelings is healthy. To cry is cathartic. To shout is cathartic. To dance is cathartic. To sing is cathartic. And there was a time before the age of censorship, before rational thought was elevated over feminine emoting and feelings, there was a time when the feelings showed up on the face and were not shamed. There was a time when regular dancing took place from dusk to dawn, when all of the shapes in the human psyche were honored. But we're not in that time. We have a narrow sliver allotted to communicate in a monotonous voice, in a monotone, that we had a certain amount of feelings, usually in the past, not now, but I felt this when you did that. And the response is equally unemotive and unscientific in biological terms to say, well, thank you for sharing. And that's about as much room as the feminine psyche has within the cult, whether you are a man or a woman or a weak woman who loses it, i.e. loses the box, steps outside the box, and actually has embodied feelings from time to time, something that we must both humiliate and make allowances for, right? Given that we're dealing with feminine energy, which is obviously within a chauvinistic cult not as welcome, not as mature, not as honorable as masculine energy. And so throughout my entire life, as I've shared vulnerable feelings, I have noticed that that part of my psyche is brushed aside, is not honored, is not welcome at the table, and the conversation pivots to something interesting. I felt sad, this happened. I felt angry, this happened. I was confused, this happened. And then I went to the movies and I saw this. And then I went shopping and I saw this. And in a Western cult, The emotion is sidestepped. And the response is, oh, that thought, that activity, that car, that's interesting. I'm interested in that non-emotional new topic, in that thought, in that idea. That's an interesting idea. That's very interesting. And the subtext is there's no emotion in you or in me about this, so let's focus on that. The feminine is not welcome at the table. Right? So what happens when we banish, when we suppress, when we dishonor any part of the psyche, any part of ourselves, any part of others, any part of the planet? If you dishonor your ecology, the ecology curses you. If you poison the water that you drink, you are cursed by the poisoned water. If you set fire to a forest that you walk in, you are burned by the forest you set fire to. And if you cut down the trees that give you oxygen, you are cursed by the toxic chemicals that you breathe. That which we dishonor curses us in return. And so it is an older woman. It is a feminine crone that delivers the curse to Sleeping Beauty. And we could say that to be put to sleep, another word for that might be to dissociate, to go numb. That when the crone energy within men and women is cut off, is not invited, and we receive the curse of that disconnection, of that trauma, as the psyche is cut in half, and part of us banished, that what happens is the dissociated part goes numb, we go numb to the dissociated part, we can no longer feel, we can no longer be awake, we go asleep, and we become part of the machine. And this is where the magic happens, because every cult, every culture in the history of culture has defined itself by cutting off part of the ecology. We don't eat this. We don't talk like that. We don't have sex like this. We don't believe that. We do this. We are this way. We're not that way. A cult is defined by the box that is used to shape it. So, that being the case, the cult is going to kill off some part of us. The cult is going to banish some part of our possibility, some part of our probability, some part of our actuality. The cult is going to cut us in half and say this is okay and this is not okay. And in doing so, in enacting that trauma, some part of us goes to sleep for 100 years. For the duration of our journey as members of that cult. But here's where the magic comes in. One of the relatives that waited until the end adds a softening. You cannot undo a curse, but you can add additional code at the end of the curse. Right? If you live in a cult that cuts you in half and banishes part of who you are, you will be cursed by the part that you banish. meaning the act of cutting causes harm. And you can call that harm whatever you want, but it's innately connected to dishonoring parts of who we are. When we dishonor parts of who we are, we do harm to ourselves, is another way of saying it. And in this case, our cult dishonors large swaths of the sacred feminine that exists in every man and in every woman at birth and is cut off in the Western cult. Now, the softening at the end is that at some point, surrounded in the fortress of defenses, the castle of thorns, the sleep, the numbness, will be broken by true love's kiss. So, what clue does this give us? What hope does this give us for retrieving, for waking up again and reclaiming the sacred feminine within us as men and as women? And I want to just pause for a moment and say that chauvinism hurts men as much as it hurts women. At every level. As a man, if I want to maintain rank, I can't cry. It's just one way it hurts me. If I want to be sensitive and gentle to a child, I'm suspected as a pedophile. I've calculated in the United States that I have 10 seconds to be friendly to a child in a park or playground before I am viewed suspiciously. Meaning, something's wrong if a man wants to be kind to a child. Now, if a man is completely dissociated, completely sociopathic, has no interest whatsoever in children, well, that's normal in a sociopathic cult. But how do you develop a sociopathic cult? Sociopathic means you're cut off from your humanity. And how does a cult orchestrate the cut? How does a cult raise a generation of sociopaths who have lost contact with their humanness? Well, one way is to let a child know at birth that the intensity and the depth of their feelings are not welcome, are shamed, are humiliated, and could get you killed. You won't belong to the group if you let your feminine side show up at the party. And you're a good boy, a nice boy, if you don't cry, if you don't show too many feelings. So, coming back to the story, how do we reclaim the severed parts of ourselves? And what the story says is that, yes, we will go numb. We will be truncated. We will be traumatized. We will be cut, and we will go to sleep within the framework of our cult. That will happen because the cult dishonors so many parts of who we are as men and as women. That the trauma is so deep that there's no choice but to go to sleep. But the story also says that the remedy lies in sensuality, a kiss, and love. The kind of falling in love where we see the God, we see the goddess, we see the transcendent in our partner. That if someone sees the God in us, the goddess in us, and kisses us with devotional passion and awakens the numb, severed, cursed feminine within us, we can and will wake up. If someone does that, we can restore our lost and frozen femininity. And it's true. And there is a reason why every religion based on fear and power, right? The all-loving God will burn you in hell for eternity if you don't do exactly what you're told. Fear and control. Your government, right, will burn you in hell if you don't do exactly what you're told. Right? If you don't go along with the narrative. And the strongest taboos are generally around sex and free expression. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about that here. We don't hold hands in public. We don't kiss with passion. Right? We hide our sexuality. We don't allow this kind of sexuality. Right? The cult, with its subcategories of control and fear-based religion, does an enormous amount to restrict passionate, sensual touch. Right? We don't do it at work. We don't do it at church. We don't do it in public. Well, that's eliminated 95% of all sexuality right there. Right? Why not have a cult, a culture, where sexuality was sacred, where we did do it in church, right? Because that wakes sleeping beauty, that wakes the inner feminine inside each one of us. So every control and power structure, be it the Catholic Church, be it a government, be it people in our lives that want to control us out of fear, be it family members. So-and-so was kissing behind the bushes. Mom, go do something. Right? Sleeping Beauty might wake up with true love's kiss and freedom be restored.